There are two requirements for your muscles to feel strong. So if you're not feeling strong, at least one of these requirements is not being met. And in this week's episode of the Exercise is Health podcast, we're telling you exactly what to do about that. We're going to cue our introduction and dive right into this conversation. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Exercise is Health podcast, brought to you by Muscle Activation Schaumburg. We're your hosts, Charlie
and Julie.
And today we're discussing this idea of what do you do if you're not feeling strong? Maybe you feel like you're losing strength. Maybe you feel like your body has just been depleted with strength. Whatever it is, there are two reasons why this could be happening. So at least one of the two, if not both, is something that is happening to you right now. We're going to explain to you not only what those reasons are, but how you can go about addressing them. I want to let you know that if you want to start taking action on what we are discussing today, that's exactly what we can help you do at our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg, where we specialize in muscle activation techniques. So all you have to do to see our availability and get on our schedule is go to www.matschaumburg.com. Click the big green button that says Get Started, and you can schedule yourself for your initial MAT consultation and assessment. So this idea of losing strength is something that a lot of people experience, and the number one thing that often gets blamed is age. It's like, oh, I'm just getting old. That's why I'm feeling the way that I am. But what we found is there are two reasons that don't have anything to do with your age, that when they get addressed, the age stuff doesn't matter. It just flat out doesn't matter because you start to see that your strength improves regardless of what your age is. And so we want to address these two things for you today. We want to highlight what they are. We want to tell you exactly what you can do about them.
That's right, Charlie. And this conversation I literally just had with a client. That's why it was top of mind. But I realized, a lot of people have this going on. And if you just address these two things, your strength will really skyrocket. I know a lot of people are out there. We always hear like, oh, people don't want to exercise. But a lot of you listeners, you do want to exercise.
Exactly.
And you're trying to put this puzzle together so that you can live that strong, active lifestyle that you're looking for. So I'll give you a little backstory on the client I was just talking to this about. He wants to be active, but he has a really tight back from some injuries in high school, and it travels up to his neck. Sometimes his hip gets a little achy. So he has started to pick and choose different exercises that he wants to do. And so far, it has dwindled all the way down to biking and only doing bicep curls, triceps, and chest flies. Because he felt like those ones were really going to not flare up his neck, they weren't going to make his back feel funky, and it was going to keep his hip, kind of status quo. And then he was also doing a lot of stretching to try to, self-manage like the tightness he was feeling. So there was a lot of issues going on with this story because number one, he wasn't getting stronger and more active. He was losing strength, feeling more tight, was starting to be able to not sleep on one side because of the tightness and achiness. So all the signs and symptoms were saying, hey, your physical life is not taking care of the physical ailments. So we got to make a change in your physical life. So the first thing that we talked about was that we have to actually be regularly challenging all your muscles. You can't expect your muscles to be balanced and strong and things to be functioning optimally if you're not regularly keeping all of your muscles strong. If you heard the list of exercises he was doing, they were very biased. In fact, 3 strength training exercises. And so everything else other than those 3 things were getting neglected. And actually, when you do just like 3 exercises, a lot of times that encourages more compensation because you're saying, hey, you 3 muscles, we're going to keep strengthening you. And all the rest, you're going to stay weak. So if you can imagine, that strength difference gets bigger. That is what compensation is, when there's a big strength difference in your muscles. So when you look at your exercise life, you got to think, okay, I got to make sure that I'm doing well-rounded strength training. And when we say that, what we mean is that every muscle group, every motion needs to be strengthened. And when you leave motions and muscle groups out, that's when you encourage more compensation and you encourage more imbalance. You encourage more regular tightness in your body. So make sure you're doing full strength training for your whole body.
Exactly. And there's actually 3 parts to that statement that you brought up where you said regularly challenge all your muscles. So the first idea is regularly, meaning like weekly, you're challenging, you're doing exercises for the different muscles. Not like once a week is the only time that you do your strength training, but at least once a week you're hitting all the different all the different muscles. So it's like if you have one lower body day and one upper body day, and maybe your upper bodies are split into a different a couple different areas, or you have your lower body day split into a couple different areas, whatever it is, right? But you are regularly working all of your muscles over the course of the week. Secondly is challenge, and this is a part that so often gets overlooked because we want to believe that, well, I'm doing something, so that something must be enough, right? It's very hard for people to be like, well, I'm doing something, which I feel like is the most that I can do in my life right now, but it's just not enough. It's really hard for people to grasp that idea and be fully on board with that idea. But the truth of the matter is there are minimum requirements that need to be hit from a frequency perspective and from an intensity perspective. And so that's where the frequency is the regularly and the intensity is the challenge. Like when you go and you exercise, when you do your strength training, you need to be pushing yourself. It needs to be a really challenging exertion for your body, assuming that you are ready for that, assuming that you wake up in the morning and you're like, okay, yeah, this is a day that I can push myself. But the default should be, hey, when I go and I strength train, I'm going to push myself, and not just check it off my list. And then there are going to be days where you don't feel up to pushing yourself as hard, but those should be not the norm. The norm should be, okay, when I go and I strength train, I'm challenging myself, and I'm doing it regularly. I'm doing it frequently. I'm doing it multiple times a week, and I'm doing all my muscles, which is the third part of that statement. Regularly challenge all my muscles, meaning I have upper body days where I'm working the front side of my upper body, and I'm working the back side of my upper body, and I'm working my arms and my shoulders, and I'm working my upper back, and I'm working, my chest, all these different things, right? And I have lower body days where I'm working my quads and my glutes and my hamstrings and my calves. All right, all the different, working the outside of my hips, working the inside of my hips, working the front of my hips, working the front of my lower legs, and it doesn't mean that the volume for each of those areas needs to be the same. That wouldn't make sense. Like, it wouldn't make sense to be like, okay, you're going to challenge, your anterior tibialis, from a volume perspective as much as you're going to challenge your glutes. That just doesn't make sense. So that's where understanding how to design it for yourself comes into play. But the point is like over the course of the week, you're regularly exposing all of your muscles to a challenge. And that really is the first thing that so often gets overlooked, because we're either thinking, well, I'm doing something, so that something must be enough from a frequency perspective or a challenge perspective, or you are really challenging yourself, but not with the variety of challenge to the different muscles that needs to take place.
That's right. And more on that challenge piece, because I also had this just come up, is that when we say push yourself, what we're saying, what many people hear is push beyond, which represents injury. To us, that also represents injury. We're not saying that. We're actually saying like push towards your max. See, a lot of people have a maximum exertion level, and it's, some arbitrary place, right, where you can exert yourself. But most people exercise at a place that is so far below that level, so far below that maximum level gets lower a little bit each day. And we start noticing how low it's gotten when you do the stairs and it hurts your hip, or you go on that trip and you weren't able to carry your bag, And so what is often missed with that challenge piece is that, and what we're trying to say is, we want you to push towards your max. It's almost like a regularly and safely, strategically visited place. It's not always avoided as most people do. And when you regularly approach your maximal levels, again, being safe, knowing your 4 exercise for life principles, making sure you're being mindful of how you're doing everything, that is how you maintain your upper limits and even improve your upper limits. And most people feel they can never improve their their strength and ability in that way because they're never taught how to do it safely. And most people just never do it. So that, again, it comes back to like the age thing. Well, most people my age aren't doing this. Yeah, most people your age aren't doing the things they like in their life because they're too weak. So we don't want you to be too weak for your life.
You know, one thing I've seen over the course of my career, and it still holds true to this day, is the people who are that we've worked with, who are willing to kind of like hand over the reins and be like, all right, I might not feel like pushing myself, you know, to this exertion level today, but I'm going to anyways because that is what you are guiding me to do. They're the ones that consistently not only make progress, but over the long term get much, much better results, as opposed to the people who are wanting to try to dictate and try to control. Well, you know, that feels a little bit harder than, you know, I think I should go today. Consistently, when that's the case, you see that people just kind of stay at the same level and just fight with all their might just to try to stay at the same level. Now, don't get me wrong. At some point in all of our lives, staying at the same level is a really great thing. I mean, that's awesome, right? But for the majority of our lives, the vast, vast majority of our life, we should see that we still have the ability to make progress. And I've seen this a lot with the clients that you've worked with, Julie, the ones that are just like, okay, yeah, whatever you tell me to do, you know, I'm going to give you feedback if something hurts. But aside from that, like, I trust you with the intensity. I trust you with the volume, everything like that. There's the ones that continue to make progress month after month, year after year, versus the ones that try to kind of micromanage by saying, hey, you know what? Yeah, I'm just, you know, this feels like too much for me today. And every day it feels like too much. And so I share that. I want to share that because so often when we are thinking about challenging ourselves, there's a lot more that you can actually do with your workouts from a challenge and intensity perspective than most people give themselves credit for. Like your body is far more capable than most people give themselves credit for. And so to have that guidance to say, hey, you know what, it's actually safe to push right now. I know these are the things that you're feeling, but we need to teach you how to interpret those signals to say, instead of saying, oh, we need to pull back, it's actually signals to say, no, actually, we need to keep pushing forward with it. And that is actually a huge piece of this challenge puzzle, understanding that within yourself and having somebody to help guide you through that. That's something that I've seen, you know, throughout our careers and definitely, you know, up to this day.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because when you exercise, there's just a lot of, and there is a lot of communication your body gives you. And a lot of times when that communication isn't completely, like, we don't know how to translate it, like, in a clear way, we think like, okay, yeah, back off. Like, for example, like, I know our last podcast, we talked a lot about like systemic, you know, feelings of systemic things and what do you do when you feel like a systemic fatigue setting in and all that. But another great example, in one of my sessions just today, we were doing knee extension and my client was like, yeah, feel my knee. It's like, okay, your knee is allowed to talk to you. Does it feel like we need to stop? He's like, no, it just like feels, I feel it right there. Next time we came back around to it, he didn't feel his knee and we could go up and wait. And so he was like, well, what does that mean? I was like, just means that a lot of your muscles needed to get turned on and used. And now your knee is way more supported. You know, I didn't change anything in your knee. He has a meniscus history stuff going on. But the only thing we changed was the amount of muscle recruitment around that area. So I think sometimes just being open to like, hey, my body's allowed to talk to me. I'm allowed to like not back off and just see what happens. And sometimes you'll be surprised. You're like, wow. And most times you'll be surprised actually of like, okay, more muscles working, more support. I actually feel better. You know, things are feeling and moving better. So, so again, it's just another emphasis to try not to back off the challenge. Doesn't mean you need to smash into your max, but it also means that, hey, if your knee's talking to you, you're doing the knee extension, there might be 20 adjustments, meaning you start at 30 pounds, then you go to 35, then you do a 40, and you do 45. You're just creeping up to see, how's my body going to respond to this weight, knowing that I do need to approach my max for today.
Exactly. All right. So that's the first requirement is you must regularly challenge all of your muscles. Remember, there's 3 parts to that. You need to make sure that you're hitting all 3 of those. This second requirement is you must address muscle inhibition. All right. Within your body, there are muscles that are not being communicated as well to by your brain. All right, your brain's not is sending signals to your muscles as well, telling those muscles to contract. And that's what we call muscle inhibition. Now, when this happens, your body is forced to recruit and use other muscles to try to perform the same task, right? So if you have certain muscles, for example, in your arms that aren't working as well, and you go to do a shoulder press, well, your body's going to have to use other muscles in order for you to do that shoulder press. The problem is that if in that state you really try to challenge yourself, in the short term, you might be able to get the shoulder press done. In the long term, it's just going to reinforce you compensating, which is going to start to put weird stresses on your joints, can lead to different aches and pains, can lead to different issues, feelings of muscle tightness, everything like that. And so this muscle inhibition, when you get it addressed, is literally like getting all of your muscles on board, to then be able to go and do the activities, do the exercises, do the workouts, whatever it is that you're doing, with a kind of fully restored system. And it makes all the difference for your workouts.
That's right. When you're actively trying to make sure that all your muscles are on board and you're working with a full team, that's when movements feel smoother. That's when you feel like, wow, I can exercise and I don't feel so beat up orthopedically afterwards or systemically afterwards even. And so making sure that you're working with the fullest team that you can will really help your body feel and function in a more strong way, especially over time. That's why we love to use muscle activation techniques when things are feeling off in your body, because it is the best modality that we know of that looks at the body, finds where are these muscles that are not communicating well with the brain. Because really, when you go do exercise, when you lift weights, when you go for your walk, when you move around your house, when you're moving and exercising your body's going to use muscles that are easily available to it. Meaning, hey, I can connect to that muscle really quickly, it's easy. What your body's not going to use are the muscles that are struggling to communicate. And so when you go to an MAT session, it's like a little private tutoring session for those struggling muscles. So that next time you go and exercise, they can jump in and participate in a more full way. Now, a lot of times when people feel off or they feel like they've got this, like an example, like my client I just said that has a really tight, achy back or neck, the modalities that are used do not address these compensations. A lot of times stretching or resting or icing or heating are used. And that's a really good way to change symptoms for a little while. But remember, the goal is for you to get back to being active, to be back to being regularly challenging all your muscles, right? And so if you don't start solving that problem or changing that issue, then it's just going to get highlighted again when you go and do it, right? And so not only yes, maybe you need some rest sometimes, maybe you need a hot pack sometimes or a cold pack or whatever. But in the end, we have to start also like working on this issue and working on getting the muscles that aren't connected well back up and firing so that you're, again, exercising with a full team of muscles.
Exactly. So if you feel like you're losing strength, if you feel like your body is just not strong and it seems to be getting worse or seems to at least not be changing, it's going to be one of these two things. Either you are not regularly challenging all of your muscles, or you have muscle inhibition that needs to be addressed. Now, look, there can be acute times of, feeling weak. If there's, you get the flu or some other kind of illness or whatever, but that lasts for a few days to a couple weeks or whatever, and then you bounce back and you're ready to go. That's different than what we're talking about. We're talking about like if you look over the last year and you feel like, okay, wow, yeah, like my body is just getting weaker. If look over the last 5 years, like, yeah, my body is just consistently getting weaker. Then we have seen it be 100% of the time throughout our career one of these two things, if not both. You're not regularly challenging all of your muscles, and or you have muscle inhibition that needs to be addressed. All right. Now, both of these things are addressable, unlike the idea of, well, it's old age and there's nothing I can do about it. The great news is there absolutely is something you can do about it. And that's what we talked with you about today. And that's exactly what we can help you do at our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg. So if you're hearing this right now and in your mind you're raising your hand of like, yeah, this is me. Like, I just feel like my body is weak. It's getting weaker. It hasn't been, feeling strong for quite some time now. And I need help, doing one or both of these things, either regularly challenging all of my muscles and or addressing muscle inhibition. That's exactly, like I said, what we can help you do at our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg, where we specialize in muscle activation techniques. So all you need to do to see our availability and get on our schedule is go to our website, www.matschaumburg.com. On our website, we have a big green button that you can click that says Get Started, and you can schedule yourself for your initial MAT consultation and assessment. Well, thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Your eyes on YouTube, your ears on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, your attention wherever you're paying attention to us. We truly appreciate that. We do not take that lightly. If you wouldn't mind leaving us a rating and review wherever you consume our content on and sharing this with somebody that you know needs to hear this message, it would mean the world to us. We are wishing you a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week.
This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Gates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.